Om Namo Baghavathe Shri Ramanaya. Hari Om. Glad to be here, thinking aloud yet again in this Ramana's Atma Vichara series. Usually, devotees approach Mahatmas with their doubts, seeking clarifications, and sometimes the response by Mahatmas would puzzle you even further, because the answer given by Mahatmas, if you look at it literally, it will be a paradox. So today we are going to look at one such incident between a devotee and Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. So this devotee asked Bhagavan, what are the obstacles which hinder self-realization? Then Bhagavan replies, the habits of the mind, implying Vasanas, is what hinders self-realization. This was the response by Bhagavan. Okay, then the devotee thought, okay, I am getting somewhere. So then the devotee asks, how does one remove these habits of the mind or vasanas? Then the Bhagavan responds by self-realization. So here the devotee came up with a doubt, the obstacles for self-realization, and Bhagavan says the obstacle for self-realization is the habit of the mind, which is vasanas. So then the next question is, okay, I want to self-realize. So if the vasanas are the obstacles, then how do I remove the vasanas? How do I get rid of the vasanas so that I can realize myself? That was the question by devotee, and Bhagavan says self-realization is the only way you can remove vasanas. So this sounds like the typical, the chicken and egg story, where which came first, the chicken or egg? So to self-realize, you have to remove the vasanas. But only if you self-realize, the vasanas will be gone. This was the response by Bhagavan. So if you look at it literally, it doesn't make any sense. As I said, it is a paradox. But who said this? Bhagavan himself said this. So definitely, if Bhagavan said that, there have to be some reason why he said that. There have to be a meaning to what seems to be a statement, a mad statement. So let's try to understand. First is, what is vasana? The habits of the mind is actually the tendency which we have picked up over many lives, which is the seed for our thoughts. And the thoughts is what we use to define ourselves in terms of our body, mind and intellect, or the finite. And this is what is known as ignorance. So obviously, as long as these thoughts are there, as long as these seeds of the thoughts are there, and when they sprout as thoughts, obviously you will continue to define yourself or regard yourself as a finite entity. Therefore, unless otherwise we get rid of these thoughts, and the seed of the thought is the vasanas, unless otherwise we get rid of them, we can never be free of thoughts, and we can never realize the self. These vasanas have to be rid of for self-realization. But he says, only if you self-realize, you can transcend vasanas. So what's the meaning of that? See, generally, our tendency is to continue thinking. So vasanas are the seeds of the thoughts, and the thoughts will result in action, and the action will lead to experience of the result, and new vasanas will be formed. And this is a perpetual chain which will go on and on. However, when self-realization becomes your goal, then what happens is, when the vasanas comes out, the spiritual practices which you do in the name of purifying the mind so that you can realize the self, there what we do is, instead of developing the vasanas into many thoughts, we engage on ignoring them. We engage in a practice where we tend to ignore those thoughts, negate those thoughts, reject those thoughts. So the vasanas, though they will try to sprout thoughts, we don't allow those thoughts to develop through negation, rejection, or ignoring the thoughts. So by doing this, what we are doing is, we are bringing the vasanas to the surface, but we don't allow it to further develop into new vasanas. So this is what is known as vasana exhaustion. So only if you have the self-realization as a goal, then you will engage in this. So when you have self-realization as a goal, and when you practice these different sadhanas, different spiritual practices to purify the mind, purification of the mind is getting rid of the vasanas, exhausting vasanas. So when you exhaust the vasanas, naturally it will lead to self-realization. So self-realization becomes a cause for exhausting the vasanas, because unless otherwise you take up self-realization as your goal, you cannot exhaust vasanas. But the moment you take it up, then that becomes the cause of exhaustion of vasanas. So that's why he said, how to get rid of the vasanas? Self-realization. So what appeared to be a perpetual, a vicious cycle, that, obstacle for self-realization is vasanas, but to transcend the vasanas you have to self-realize. Well, it is not a paradox, it is not a perpetual cycle, it is not a vicious cycle. There is a meaning behind it. That is, when you take up self-realization as your goal and engage in these spiritual practices to purify the mind, then that becomes the means of exhausting the vasanas, so leading to self-realization. So self-realization becomes the cause, in a way, by pushing us to exhaust the vasanas, and once you exhaust the vasanas, you reach your goal. Om Namo Baghavathe Shri Ramanaya.